I suspect many of you feel as though you know our speaker because you watch his programs. There's something that when you see people on TV and you see people in videos and whatnot, you kind of have a familiarity with them. And it's a nice thing, but somehow sometimes when you meet them in person, it's a little bit less nice. In Jan's case, it's the opposite. Jan is the senior editor of the Epoch Times, host of the American Thought Leaders, and co-host of Fallout with Dr. Robert Malone and Kash's Corner with Kash Patel. His career has spanned academia, international human rights work for almost 2 decades, and media. He has interviewed nearly 1,000 leaders, thought leaders on camera, and specializes in long-form discussions challenging the grand narratives of our time. He's also an award-winning documentary filmmaker, producing The Unseen Crisis, Vaccine Stories You Were Never Told, DeSantis, Florida versus Lockdowns, and Finding Manny. Jan's calm demeanor, his thoughtful delivery, without that snark and gotcha vibe, is a welcome tonic in today's media. He is genuinely curious, and it shows. His success is a testament to how hungry we are for civil, thoughtful discourse. Just since I met Jan in a bar, well, actually at a conference, but technically in a bar in February, I estimated, and I could be wrong, but I estimated he's interviewed 64 people on every salient topic imaginable. So whether he's talking about excess deaths and disability statistics from the insurance industry, the medical harms of transmedicine, Europe's China relations, China's fentanyl war, the UN connections to Hamas, the weaponization of Interpol to hunt down dissidents, the war on our minds, whatever the topic, and they are many, Jan sits down with the most interesting voices of today. And tonight, we are honored to sit down with him. Please help me welcome to the Liberty Forum of Silicon Valley, Jan Jekielek.
Wow. I feel so good about myself now. That was probably the best introduction I've ever gotten. Thank you, Jane. That was wonderful. We're here to talk about TikTok, right? And Jane was talking about something a little earlier, which is particularly salient. It's our ability to speak to each other. One of the things that the social media, I guess, revolution over the last 2 decades has created is these silos, right? And you can think of, TikTok, you could think of as if there's a kind of extreme version of that phenomenon, right? Or perhaps an app that will actually foster that phenomenon as opposed to the opposite. TikTok might be it. So it's very interesting that your speaker next month is going to be Brent. And that's someone actually, I'm just reading his book as we speak, right? This figuring out how we can actually talk to each other, because the reason we talk to each other freely and say the things that are unpopular is because if you stop doing that, we start doing really bad things to each other, and we don't want to go there. So let's talk about TikTok. It's the ticking time bomb of the U.S. China relationship, right? That's the title. Why might that be? Does anyone have an idea? I like to ask a question at the beginning of every talk. Does anyone have an idea why we might call it that? And if you don't, that's okay. I'll just continue onwards. Please. That's so incredibly important point. Okay, she says it's controlled media. It's like an extension. In China, you're probably very well aware that the media is entirely controlled by the Chinese regime. It functions as propaganda for the regime, and that TikTok is likely an extension of that. I think that's a very important point. So thank you. One more option. Right. So you can also ask this question, right? People will say, well, it's just the algorithm that decides what people see, right? Because this is actually one of the issues, right, that we hear about, that you see the things you want to see as opposed to maybe some things which would be valuable for you to see. So it could function as a type of brainwashing. So what I try to do with this talk is I'm going to tell you a little bit about how the Chinese Communist Party operates, okay? And I'll let you think about how a tool like TikTok might be used by them. So for starters, the the Chinese Communist Party, in the name of in the words of Xi Jinping himself, the dictator currently, is waging a people's war against America. Okay, that's an official position, right? I don't even think a lot of people know this, right? Because typically the language you hear from the State Department elsewhere, that it's an adversary or maybe not even adversary, competitor, right? Something like that. And there's still this huge group of people that are saying engagement, 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 including one of the most prominent China scholars in America from Harvard University, Graham Allison, right? Recently said that America and China are like conjoined twins. They share a digestive system. Imagine what might happen if you were to, separate them. That's the kind of language that we're hearing. The reality is that there's a doctrine that the Chinese military uses called unrestricted warfare. How many people have heard of this? Just a show of hands. Okay, great. That's very good. Now, unrestricted warfare means using any method that's possible to use for what's effectively warfighting, okay? And that includes, one example really quickly is, for example, fentanyl. Some people describe fentanyl as a reverse opium war. I think that's a good way to describe it, right? And another thing that a lot of people won't know, and I'll alert you to Peter Schweitzer's recent book, Blood Money, which describes this very well. But while it is Mexican cartels that are delivering the fentanyl across the border primarily, the Chinese regime is involved in every stage of the process, including selling pill presses to them, including running the ports, including laundering the money. So it's very much part of this sort of another doctrine that they use is called the three warfares. The drug warfare is one of those three warfares. So, okay, that's point number one. Point number two, there's a national intelligence law that was passed in China in 2017, okay? The essence of the law is this. If you are asked to spy for the Chinese Communist Party, for the Chinese regime, you must do so, and you're not allowed to reveal that to the people, obviously, that you're spying on. That's actually codified in their law since 2017. And remember that TikTok is owned by ByteDance, and ByteDance is, of course, under the auspices of the Chinese regime. Point number three, civil-military fusion. Has anyone heard of this idea? So civil-military fusion, I'll actually read, I pulled it from the State Department website recently, just so you get an idea. So this is like the official US government position on this doctrine of China. MCF, or military civil fusion, is an aggressive national strategy of the CCP, Chinese Communist Party. Its goal is to enable the PRC to develop the most advanced, technologically advanced military in the world. As the name suggests, a key part of MCF is the elimination of barriers between China's civilian research and commercial sectors, and its military and defense industrial sectors. PRC President and CCP Secretary General Xi Jinping personally oversees the strategy's implementation. So what that means is, in short, is that everyone does this if they can, and if they don't, they're in big trouble. Okay? And I mean, that's the simplest way to put it. Point number four, comprehensive national power, okay? In China, this is another thing that for some reason it hasn't really been popularized sufficiently. And China rates every country. This is part of their foreign policy approach. They rate every country on a scale of comprehensive national power. There's a measure, okay? And the US is the top of that list, okay? And the rate, whenever they make a policy determination, right, they decide, is that comprehensive national power going up, or is it going down? Is that measure going up, or is it going down? And it's always relative to what the position that China is in. So you either increase yourself, like this massive military buildup that's happening right now in China, right? Or these, for example, war games. You've probably heard about the war games that are going all around Taiwan at the moment. Or you take someone else's comprehensive national power down, right? And would be this, for example, drug warfare would be an example. How you can, eliminate 100,000 people from the population a year, right, using that. So, okay, next point. How does the Chinese Communist Party collect intelligence? Okay, it's a little bit different. So signals intelligence, you might be familiar with that. Generally, it's just, you're collecting all sorts of things from the various types of sources, like over the air, you're tapping into the internet, you're hacking things and so forth. But the human intelligence part is quite, and that's actually similar between the US and China. On the side of the human, or the human intelligence, it's quite different, right? In China, essentially everybody that's coming out of China is weaponized in a sense. Of course, they can do this to a greater or lesser extent. Some people will resist it and not collect. But the expectation, if you're leaving China, the expectation is, and the knowledge, you're incentivized in a positive way. Like if you come back with good stuff, you're going to go up in society on that social credit score, which I know all of you have heard about, right? Essentially everybody that's coming out of China is weaponized in a sense to collect some bit of intelligence that might be useful. You don't even know, right? They might not even know. And then that can be sent back and then reassembled in the same way that signals intelligence often is assembled, except this is the human intelligence that's reassembled. Okay. So how many people are aware that the official US government policy is that China is committing a genocide in Xinjiang province? Wow, that's amazing. There's not that many people, right? So, you know, in the last few days of the Trump administration, the State Department officially designated what the Chinese regime is doing to the Uyghur people as a genocide, okay? That is, and you know, it's kind of it's very difficult. The State Department, okay, likes the engagement idea, broadly speaking, okay? It's just this has been kind of a policy for the last many decades and very hard to shift giant bureaucracies like the State Department, okay? To get that to happen, and I was aware of what was happening behind the scenes, was an unbelievably heavy lift. And of course, it's well-deserved. And you know, the problem with this, theoretically at least, is that if a country is officially established to be committing genocide, which is supposed to be the worst thing that we do to each other, right? The elimination in whole of and part of a group of people through different means. It doesn't necessarily mean, you know, killing everybody right away or something like that, but it's very deliberate, right? You're supposed to do something about that, right? That's like the one, if you're gonna intervene, right, in other countries' business, this might be the thing that you actually want to intervene around, right? And you know, Bob Destro, who is the head of democracy, human rights, and labor in the last administration in the State Department, so it's Assistant Secretary of State, he agrees with me that there's actually at least 3 genocides happening in China. The other one was against the Tibetans, and the other one's against the Falun Gong, right? So this is, and I mean, we could debate, but the point is terrible things are happening and groups of people are being eliminated as state policy. Okay, the reason I'm mentioning this is that this is the level of ethics that exists at the state level in communist China. That's what's relevant here to TikTok, in my view. And of course, and I'll just add, and this has been quite prominently demonstrated, these topics, right? These 3 groups on TikTok are actually heavily censored, right? So, who here has seen the film The Social Dilemma? Okay, this is maybe 5 years ago. I can't remember when it came out exactly, but I would recommend it. It's probably on Netflix or Amazon Prime or something like that. It talks about American social media companies, and it talks about how these incredibly invasively detailed profiles are developed on every single user. Okay, so and you probably have some idea. Everybody here is liberty-minded. You probably have some idea of what that looks like. Sometimes these apps know more about you than you know about yourself in certain areas, just because they're tracking, you know, what you're looking at, for example, right? And they have a huge database of that, and based on algorithms, they put you in a particular category of behavior and so forth. So TikTok is sort of that on steroids. Okay, if you saw The Social Dilemma, so every conceivable type of collection, this is actually quite well documented, right? Imagine, you know, you're looking at your app, right, and you're doing stuff, but everything that ever comes into the periphery, right, of what you're seeing, the books behind you, what's in your kitchen, who's your family members, their faces, everything gets collected, potentially, right? Potentially. In some cases, we know it does get collected. We don't know how much of it, but we know that app collects massive amounts of data and sends it on. So now you would think to yourself, TikTok seems to be a very good intelligence collection tool, right? Is it allowed in China? That's right. TikTok is banned in China. Interesting. As is Facebook, right? As is Twitter. So now why is that? Well, we'll think about it. Maybe that's something we can talk about more in the Q&A. But it's a fascinating reality that this particular app. And by the way, there is a version in China called Douyin, right? And what that is you could think of it much more as like kind of an educational videos provider, so to speak, right? A lot of the extremes are missing, okay, from that particular app that functions similarly. Okay. Have any of you heard of a concept called machine learning fairness? Have you heard of that? Okay. So Zach Voorhees was a Google whistleblower, again, some years ago. I had him on the show about this. It's fascinating. But for Google, it was this idea that you would present to the readers or the viewers the version of reality that you wanted to see in your kind of in your utopian vision, as opposed to actual reality. So the way that would manifest, right, for example, is if you would type in this. I actually tested this. It's changed now because I looked again recently. But you would type in American inventors, and there would be a disproportionate a number of them were white men in reality, but you would see a much more, let's say, visibly diverse group that was shown, right? Because the idea was you wouldn't want to discriminate against, basically different groups of people from this invisible minorities and so forth. So, but I'm trying to give you a concept, right? Machine learning fairness. How does that work? You're kind of shaping. You're shaping the reality people see according to your own ideological predilection. So again, you can imagine that type of a concept on steroids. You've got TikTok. What about the algorithm? So it turns out that the algorithm of TikTok is not just a proprietary secret of TikTok and ByteDance, but it's actually a state secret of the Chinese regime. So I always thought that this particular thing is kind of revelatory, right? You think, that's interesting. Why would that be if they have nothing to do with the Chinese government, right? So, okay, now I've tried to give you a picture. Maybe I can, Jane, if I can get a sense of how much time has passed. Okay, great. I wanted to give you kind of a picture of some elements of how the Chinese Communist Party functions, some elements of how social media functions, and then I wanted to kind of bring us a little more up to date into this legislation that has passed the House, passed the Senate, signed into law by President Biden. Basically, it's a TikTok divestiture bill. Okay, so the idea is that in a very short period of time, several months, TikTok needs to find an American buyer or be unable to operate in the US. That's the semblance of the bill. Now, so this is interesting, right? Because we have all these liberty-minded people here, right? This could be a concern. Is this a freedom of speech violation to basically take an app down, right? That's used by the way, 170 million Americans, right? They have about 1 billion worldwide. 170 million of them are Americans. And so I think this is actually a very real question. And I want to give you a little bit of text from the legal filing that TikTok submitted in response, because everybody kind of understood that it would be immediately challenged legally if this bill is to go through. This is what they said. This is from the legal filing itself, okay? The Chinese government has made clear that it would not permit a divestment of the recommendation engine that is a key to the success of TikTok in the United States. So it's because when you think about this world, right, I could tell you 100% of Chinese companies are beholden to the Chinese regime, right? And I could tell you that, any American company that goes in there that works there has to provide its IP to the Chinese partner that it's forced to work with. I could tell you all these things. But it's rare that in a legal filing you get like the confirmation, right? But yeah, actually the Chinese government is not going to allow for people to look at this algorithm, right? And so which means they're not going to let it be bought, right? And that just happened. I wonder if that was intentional. I was kind of shocked when I read that in the filing. So here's another thing that a lot of people have been concerned about when it comes to this particular bill, and I don't want to kind of get too much into the nitty-gritty, right? But the effect is, you may have heard that it gives the President of the United States too much power over the ability to basically control what apps are available in the US and not. Okay, so I just want to share a little bit of the reality of that, or at least how I understand it, and speaking with the legal experts that I have, which is that one, there's only 4 countries that the President has the right to do this with, and those are Iran, China, North Korea, and Russia. Okay? So, and these are all countries that have various levels of, known active information warfare operations against the U.S. and are, I use the term enemy, the term adversary is used. Again, I don't know what the official positions are. So that's one. And the other issue is, I do think that there is a free speech issue here, right? Because there are 170 million Americans that are using this various. Some of them are using it for their livelihoods, right? And if this were shut down, because there's no way that the Chinese regime will allow access to this particular, technology. By the way, do you know why it won't allow access? I want to get a few thoughts from the crowd here on this one. Why will the China? I mean, my position always has been that there's zero chance they'll ever allow this to be divested, and open up under the hood. Okay, I see. Okay, it's their own IP. Okay, that's a good answer. I saw this gentleman over here in the. Right. So these are all excellent answers, but the way the Chinese regime views us, okay, it views us as a totalitarian regime, looks like an enemy it seeks to subvert, right? So they're saying to themselves, wow, we have the most powerful influence tool known to man in our possession, which we can use and do use in various ways. And we can discuss some of that in the Q&A, how it's used. Are we going to give it to the U.S. intelligence services? Right? That's how they're thinking about it. And, that's an interesting point, isn't it? Right? So I don't think they're ever going to do that. Plus, as you said, then you'd know, if you actually saw the real algorithm, you'd know, how it can be used and how it can be tweaked and how it can be manipulated to shape opinion, right? How many people here are familiar with the work of Dr. Robert Epstein? So he's a psychologist, was past editor of Psychology Today, and one of the things what he did was he created kind of a fake Google, okay, and he got a bunch of people to use it, and he would put up basically you would be searching for different types of people you might want to vote for, different candidates, right? And what he would do is he would manipulate the order in which these candidates would appear. Some of them would be random. In other cases, he would stack it so that certain candidates appeared higher in the list. And what he was able to just demonstrate convincingly, right, is that if you are an undecided voter, and you can, by strategically placing candidates at certain levels in the stack, you can quickly move someone in like 3 or 4 iterations to making a decision on a vote. This is only, by the way, works for undecided people in his models, right? But yeah, you can actually get, and they won't realize that they've been influenced. Okay, well, the reason I'm mentioning this is something he's been able to demonstrate in Google. He's been able to demonstrate it actually in other social media now. I think he's just starting on TikTok from the last time I talked to him about it. But think about how powerful that is, right? And think about it, how powerful it is in the hands of a very large social media giant. Now think about it, how powerful it is in the hands of a regime that seeks to, basically win this unrestricted war with America by 2049. If you want to understand how that's working, you can watch our final war film on the Epoch Times. So with that, I'm going to finish up with this part of the talk. I do want to mention a couple more things. One of them is that many people are subscribers. So many, and quite a number of you came up to me and said, "Hi, I watch you," and I love speaking with people who are viewers of the show or just simply subscribers. If you're a subscriber to the Epoch Times, it's about 90% of our revenues right now come from you, from individual subscribers. That's how we're funded, as people often ask me, right? So thank you for that. You're our lifeblood. And of course, I want to encourage everyone to subscribe as well, if you haven't already. Right now, we have about, and I don't share this number publicly, we have over 1.5 million paid subscribers, okay? And about 7 million people in our ecosystem. And about 500,000 of those are print. So we've actually grown since 2018, 500,000 print subscribers. So, I think that's unusual. So, if you want the support for everything I've just said, I've just given you kind of a taste, right? But we were founded by Chinese Americans back in the day. We have our, sources deep inside China that at great personal risk provide us with information. And we're going to keep doing that. So with that, I think it's time to do some Q&As, and I'm very excited about the questions. And I'm going to repeat one. To start, there's a gentleman over at the back. We were at a little event just before that we did this, and this gentleman asked this fantastic question. Okay, the question was, is TikTok itself a misdirection? Right? And I thought, oh, wow, that's really interesting, right? Because on the one hand, I think I've talked a bit about how TikTok itself might be misdirecting the users with particular types of information. There's great examples of this. For example, after October 7th, right? After October 7th, what we saw on TikTok was 97% sort of pro-Palestinian, pro-Hamas content being distributed. Okay, think about that. That's just an example. So there's a kind of potential for misdirection, and there's actual misdirection. But the other part is we've been talking about TikTok so much. We've been thinking about TikTok, this bill and everything, but what's happening in America? There's still CFIUS, which is the Committee on Foreign Investment, is allowing land purchases besides air bases, by very affluent Chinese nationals, 100% of whom have ties to the Chinese regime. We've got multiple spying operations. Here in California, we had this crazy biolab that we still don't understand what was really in there, and the CDC hasn't provided us with a lot of good information. Joshua Phillip did a special report on that. I'd invite you to watch that as well. So I really like that question about the misdirection. It's both. It's both a misdirection in the sense that it's making us not focus on a whole bunch of other really important areas in terms of how the Chinese regime is subverting this country, but it's also itself doing misdirection. So Jane, I think I'm ready for the good ones.
Terrific.
Yeah.
For the good ones. Okay. So we do want to talk about TikTok, but what other tools of our free and democratic society are being used or will be used against us, Jan?
This is a in a way, a tough question, because the whole concept of unrestricted warfare is that you use, there's actually a saying that translates as strangle them with your own system, with their own systems. Strangle them with their own systems, right? So, legal warfare, right? TikTok and ByteDance is going to take this divestment situation as far as it possibly can. It's going to spend unruly amounts of money on, preventing it from happening. And ultimately, I'm very curious how it will all play out. I personally think the law is reasonably well written, given some of the background realities. It has some problems, but it's, it would be kind of, I think I was talking with Bobby Kennedy on a recent episode of American Thought Leaders about this, that it's kind of it would be nihilistic to say, let's just leave it with the Chinese communist regime. Let's just keep it to them, because there are questions about free speech, which there are, right? Which there are, and do need to be considered. So the legal area is a huge area. In the World Trade Organization, as far as I can tell, 100% of the Chinese actions at the World Trade Organization, I might be exaggerating a tiny bit, have involved, basically challenging mostly the U.S. but other Western countries legally in ways where there isn't reciprocity, right? So they're challenging something they don't do themselves, but the law is convenient, and for law-abiding countries, they kind of are stuck with following it. So that's another example of the legal warfare.
Let's clear up for some of you who may not use TikTok. What percentage of the population in America uses TikTok? You threw out a number about how many, but how much time or how many views does an average American teenager would you estimate? How often do they interact with TikTok?
I think we would need someone to do a Google, or if you don't use Google, Start Page, or DuckDuckGo search on this. I don't have that number handy, but what I do know is that another thing that the Social Dilemma film will tell you about is how and actually there's been a ton more information shown on this since that film was published. Social media companies intentionally make these apps addictive, right? Get those dopamine hits going, right? And the young people, right? Right now, Jonathan Haidt, I don't know if you're familiar with him, from NYU, is an excellent book on the anxious generation. His position is no social media for kids at all, no phones for kids at all, okay? That's really the only way to deal with it. I'm of that school, given the research that I've seen already. So again, why is this relevant to TikTok? Because imagine that ability to create addiction with no ethical boundary whatsoever constraining you, right? And so that's it.
I share your opinion about phones. There's so much anxiety and depression from the kids, and not much health. So there's some questions in the room about, and TikTok, yes, but what about Google and Meta and et cetera, et cetera? Are we also doing this to ourselves?
The answer is yes, to a degree. Okay, and I think I've covered this idea a little bit, and because we have to figure out how to deal with these insanely large companies we've allowed to grow to the state they've grown, at a point where they're larger than most countries and wield power much greater than those countries. And by the way, I have my soon-to-be brother-in-law here sitting in the front, works for one of these companies, and
welcome. Soon to be brother-in-law. I think it's family night at the forum.
Well, I'm not saying this isn't an indictment of everybody that works for these companies. This is just a reality, right? We have that. There's that saying: "Power corrupts. Absolute power corrupts absolutely." My view, and this is, I saw this first when I was working in Madagascar in my mid-20s. nonprofits, companies, there's a certain scale. When things hit that scale, things start going south. That's my observation looking back at working in all sorts of different contexts. And I don't know if there's a way around that, to be perfectly honest, right? And I do think, I mean, we know as a fact that many of these companies have been trying to make these products addictive so that people would use their products more in this sort of bad arms race to see who can use what app more, right? That's not going to work, right, in the long term. And we're already seeing the kind of devastating results internally on that. Now imagine that being specifically used, to demoralize, to create anxiety, to foster mental illness, and so forth. That's the difference, I would argue, right?
So I want to pull together a few questions about the use of TikTok. One is, if I use my phone just once to use TikTok, is that a problem? What happens? And then a broader question. Many in my circle, says one of our audience members, they decline to read ET articles I send them because they're concerned about possible Chinese Communist Party influence. Could the Epoch Times do a better job at image management, they ask?
Okay. Two very different questions.
Yes.
So wait, the first question, tell me the first question again?
Forgive me for
You
pairing
blindsided me with suggesting Communist Party influence in the Epoch Times, but so what's
Okay, I'm very sorry. That was my error. I've got a lot going on up here. It's like a snowstorm of.
No, the first question was
I had them
important,
both
though.
in my hand. That
Yeah.
didn't mean they were a pair to you guys, right?
Uh-huh.
Okay. So Jan, the first question is just about using TikTok. The audience says, "Wait, what if I just
is
click
it
on it
enough
one
to
time?
use it once?
Like, what happens?"
This is something we have an expert in the room on such things. But my understanding is that the moment you activate it, right, it starts getting a lot of your information. Okay, whatever it can, basically, right? So you don't want to do that. Now, if you did that, it's better to just delete the app and move on, right? So it's not a good idea to install it. It's not a good idea to load it at all. It's not a good idea, any of those things. But the worst idea is to keep using it, because then now you're getting into this massive data collection. And the flip side, which is pushing out to you the things. I mean, this is the thing with the algorithm, right? It's like for years, American social media companies and certainly TikTok played the same game. Just say, it's just the algorithm. We're not controlling this, right? And it's like, no, you actually are controlling this, right? Just because you're not controlling the details of every single person, it's not. You're still responsible for it. So the answer is, don't put TikTok on your phone.
And then, do you want to speak to the Epoch Times?
Oh yes, okay. So I find this fascinating. So we were founded by Chinese Americans back in 2000. John Tong, our president, that's who I work with directly. He was a theoretical physicist who was in the student movement in 1989. And wasn't a big leader, wasn't really known by the regime, but he was very smart. He got a scholarship to Georgia Tech, went over to Atlanta, and just never went back, studied. But 1999, they started persecuting the Falun Gong spiritual group. You may be familiar. So when that happened, John was in a situation where he said to himself, look, I can actually do something now. I'm in a free country. I can tell the truth about what happened. And you know what they said? They said that the students attacked the soldiers in '89, right? That was the regime argument, right? And a lot of young people believe that today, right? But John was basically said, look, this is a terrible persecution that's begun against the Falun Gong. We can tell the truth about this. And it became this wildly successful website in Chinese language. Why? Because it told the truth when there was just very little of it. In fact, a lot of Western media were just taking the Chinese Communist Party talking points as if they were legitimate information, right? So this is, I love this part because we were founded to break big narratives that are, being kind of forced on society in a kind of extreme way. It's in our DNA. But so no, the Chinese Communist Party has really not liked this for many years. In fact, it's made our life extremely difficult for a very long time, which is why I think we've also been somewhat resilient to, I guess, let's say some of these more authoritarian impulses in our society more recently, and kind of shocking to our founders and myself and so forth that this sort of thing could happen, right, by Americans or this. No, it's not the same, but that's directionally similar. So the Chinese regime has spent a lot of resources trying to shut us down. We are not, in a sense, we're influenced by them, i.e., like we like to expose them. So, but that would be the connection. And we still have a lot of people, actually, we still have people that are in the Communist Party in China who are looking to not see that be the forever plan for China that feed us information. So, there's that connection too.
It's a little hard for Americans to believe that the CCP has a police ability here. It just doesn't seem like it's possible. Mm-hmm. How long is the arm of the Chinese transnational repression, we call it, or you call it?
It's a very interesting thing because the Chinese view the Chinese regime views all Chinese people, and we've got a few people who know this very acutely, like Elmer over here, and Yi Fei. By the way, we have another hero. Let me mention this. So we have Yi Fei over here. If you could stand up, please. Yi Fei is the star of a film called Finding Courage, and it's one of the few films to actually have gotten insider video footage from Chinese labor camps. Okay, and how she got it? Well, you'll have to see the film Finding Courage again. I think it's on Amazon, Netflix. You can tell us, but yeah. So.
Thank you for being in the audience tonight.
So, oh.
Okay. The audience actually everybody can't hear you, so would you just say the name of the movie again? And you're not going to find it on Netflix.
The film is Finding Courage, and I guess it would be on Amazon Prime then.
Thank you.
Yeah. And also on Epoch Times, of course, right? Why am I saying Amazon Prime? It's on Epoch. Jeez, what's wrong with me? Okay. Can you remind me of the question?
Well, I don't know.
You
were talking about the Epoch Times in terms of their people worrying about your reputation and
right.
Cult versus under the control of the CCP.
Oh yes, okay. Chinese state police power in America. So that exists primarily in the sense of like actually having, officers of sorts who kind of are officers, kind of aren't. Right, it's sort of they operate in this gray area. Remember, unrestricted warfare, but they function in the Chinatowns primarily. And so they'll set up an office, and the office will be, they'll say it's for consular services and all sorts of, sort of community services and stuff. But the reality, and everybody knows what this really is in the Chinese community, but to the Westerners, it's kind of like, hey, we're just a community organization, right, Elmer? Elmer knows exactly how all this works. Yeah, so that, and I don't know if you know, there's in Houston, there was, it was a huge, during the Trump administration, they shut down the consulate in Houston, and this was actually a massive spying operation that was going on there. I don't know if you consider that police power exactly, because it's that's operating under sort of, diplomatic cover. I guess to some extent these consular services ones are too, but so there isn't the police power is typically exerted on the Chinese communities, not so much on the Westerners. Yeah.
And how about exerted on our Chinese friends, our Chinese American friends? We all have so many Chinese American friends. We have them in the room. we have these Chinese Americans are just part of the fabric of our world. What happens to them? What happens to them when they run for office, for instance? What happens to their family back home?
Well, what happens to their family back home? Okay, that's kind of two questions. So, I don't know if you've followed this, but in Canada, there's extensive evidence has been unearthed by CSIS, which is there's kind of the national security, kind of the equivalent. I guess it would be the equivalent of the CIA, a bit of FBI. Quite a number of parliament members, so congressional members here, the Chinese regime acted in a very deliberate way to get them elected. There's probably like 7, I think, was the allegation. There's been inquiries run into this. The results are that none of them actually succeeded in influencing things. I don't know. There's this. We don't like to in the West say, yes, these guys have been spying and they've influenced us. We have, it's like this is something in our foreign policy establishments. They just never like to admit that these kinds of things happen, and they only do it under extreme duress. I mean, that's just, I hope some of my friends in the respective foreign policy establishments would agree with me on this, but it's very difficult. So there's influence on the election side, right? Definitely. We know that in multiple countries, and Canada's the most recent example. Your question was also, there's a second question in there.
I just wonder what the personal experience is for Chinese Americans who are patriotic Americans here, what their experience might be being pressured.
I'd probably have to invite some of them up, but my observation is that for people who are let's call it primary Mandarin speakers, for example, or primary Cantonese speakers, people that have come from, communist China or Hong Kong or Taiwan, they view them as, differently, I guess, differently. They view them as people they have the right to influence. Yeah. And the more Americanized people they view them less that way. Okay. I don't know if that answers the question entirely. But.
Okay. I think one thing we should definitely talk about tonight is what's going on with the WHO. Right? There's a real sense of urgency because we're about to sign some treaties that are going to be true violations of our sovereignty. Do you think that this is sort of a pretext? Is this the arm of the CCP under One Health to get us under this social credit score?
It's interesting. I was just recently on a panel with Senator Johnson and a few other people I was hosting it to just kind of discuss the realities of these imminently being voted on pandemic treaty and international health regulations. What we rarely talk about with all this, that in fact the Chinese regime has effectively control over the WHO, and we saw that early in the pandemic, right? We saw that because they accepted all sorts of, one sort of insane policy, as Dr. Bhattacharya over here will be quick to discuss, but also just accepted like the Chinese statistics as if they're reasonable. And this whole kind of authoritarian, totalitarian kind of view of public health, I think the Chinese Communist Party's relative control over the WHO has influenced that substantially. And it's just, I'm just remarking on the fact that I've interviewed a lot on this topic recently, and we've hosted these panels, but I kind of haven't been talking about that as much, right? But the influence is profound. I mean, arguably, the head of the WHO himself, who has considerable, pull in the organization, was, placed there by the Chinese regime. A lot of people would say that. right? So.
Okay. So switch gears here. I have a little bit of a slightly historical question about Henry Kissinger. And I'm going to read this just how our member wrote it.
Uh-oh.
See what you think about this, if you have an opinion. He says, how important is he? And he wants, this person, I'm going to say he, but I'm not sure, his words, this member, audience member's words, is he a Chinese communist dupe, a Chinese communist agent, a British intelligence agent, or an American agent? Do any of those, or none of the above? Any of the above? What's your sense about what happened?
That's a very complicated question. My view, you're asking my view of Henry Kissinger.
Yeah.
I think Henry Kissinger was sort of a master of the realpolitik school of diplomacy, okay? And I think that he had, and I think that this sort of time period that, we think about, Henry Kissinger was in U.S. politics for many, many decades and profoundly influential. But as, 1989 happened, the Soviet Union collapsed, right? There was this sort of Francis Fukuyama end of history mania, right? There was, at the same time, there's kind of a free trade mania. This is like just a lot of Americans kind of believe this. I'm not, right? And I think that this fueled the sort of the way that China was viewed at the time. Okay, I'm trying to be a bit generous here, right?
I hear that.
Yeah, no, I think that's really true, and so, Henry Kissinger kind of squarely stepped into this with, I think, what we could call the Kissinger doctrine, which was engagement at, do anything for engagement, do anything and everything for engagement. Of course, he was paid very handsomely for that. As to whether I don't think he was ever a Chinese agent. I think there's people, running giant hedge funds today that would be acting more like, sort of Chinese agents today than Henry Kissinger was. But I think he was. I think that the adoption of this policy was disastrous for America, of his vision, right? Maybe that's the way I can answer that.
That's a clear and strong word.
Because in effect, we built the world's biggest dictatorship, but I think it was a combination of factors. I think part of it was greed, right? Part of it was wanting to rush to get into this massive market of people. Part of it was, just a unique situation with the way, money was cheap, so to speak, for a great many years, so you could invest at fairly low risk. A confluence of many factors, but the end result is we built the world's biggest dictatorship, and now we have to deal with it. Yeah.
So we've talked about some essential goods. You talked about how they provide all the components and evidently the means to get fentanyl in this country. The other side of that is they provide essential medicines for us, right? We're really reliant on them, and most of our goods come from there. So we have an addiction to China, right? We pretty much have an addiction to China.
This is what Graham Allison was talking about with this sort of shared digestive system, right? So there's a truth to it, but he kind of makes it sound like that's sort of like how it should be, right? But I kind of think it's madness. It's complete madness. So we're dependent, and this is the oddest thing. During the Trump administration, they really tried to what you call reshore or friendshore a bunch of the production of these medical precursors. Okay, so these are the components for many very important medicines, heart medication, a great many actually, are made in communist China. There's a whole bunch of reasons for that. The pharmaceutical companies resisted this massively, and it really hasn't shifted that much to this day, even though there is a lot, there's a lot more awareness of exposure in China, right? There's a lot of people that are sort of pulling back. Some supply chains have shifted, especially during COVID, especially when people, saw what they were doing. But the reality is that there's still a lot of really important medical components that are sourced in China, and I think it's absolutely crazy. I think this is a policy issue that should be addressed like one of the most pronto issues. So thank you for asking the question. Yeah.
Another thing I think that's rather urgent is energy. I mean, who's going to control the energy of the future? It seems like the CCP has a plan, and they have been successful in controlling the essential goods, which we're very happy to buy, and now the green energy infrastructure. So are they exploiting the climate change agenda brilliantly, and do we have a pushback for that?
They are exploiting the climate change agenda brilliantly. Because this is the irony, right? Let's say you believe, like I know a lot of people here would be what you would call climate skeptics, okay? But let's say we believe it all, okay? Or maybe not the 2 years and it's the world is ending. There's people that believe that. Let's leave those sort of extreme views out. But let's say that this too much carbon is a huge problem and it's going to affect humanity negatively and so on and so forth. I could show you a graph. There's beautiful graphs that show this, but China is building a coal power plant a day or multiples, right? While tapping into and subsidizing, everyone's familiar with the term industrial policy, right? So for national security reasons, right, China has all sorts of industries that it subsidizes massively. One of them is telecom, right, Huawei, right? Another one is all this green stuff, okay, green, all this, whatever it, batteries, solar panels. I don't even think there's manufacturing of solar panels outside of China anymore. And they subsidized it massively and just were able to force a lot of American companies out of the system, right? While doing all these things which are antithetical to that whole approach, right? So I think they're doing it completely cynically. And I think they've done an amazing job. And the end result is that we are paying them, huge amounts of money and giving them subsidies for doing that production. I think it's crazy.
Would you speak to China's role in Afghanistan right now?
Well, I'll answer the question more generally because I haven't gotten I'm not aware of kind of recent developments. One major, basically China is looking to step into every area where U.S. power kind of recedes, right? China is looking to take that area of influence over, right? And we see that a very prominent area, and this is actually kind of a huge problem, right, is Russia. If I can, move it in that direction a little bit, because I think it's much more important. At the beginning, there's this Russia-Ukraine war that's going hard. The U.S. has been putting a lot of money in there, it's other countries as well. Russia has shifted from, being kind of unmoored into, and I've been recently at an event where I was briefed by people on the ground and looking at this very closely, has transitioned into a war economy. Okay, so Russia now, and by the way, who buys Russian oil? China, right? And at the Olympics, they had their no limits partnership, after which Putin invaded just very, very shortly afterwards, because he knew basically Russia, if oil prices are higher and someone's going to buy his oil, because of course there were all these sanctions put on Russia and so forth, then he can operate and he can run his war economy. So we're in this situation that is actually, I think we're in a much more dangerous situation today but I mean, you could put blame in many places, okay, and we could have this discussion. My point is that without massive Chinese money supporting the Russian war economy right now, this wouldn't be happening, and probably we would be settled. some sort of peace agreement would have been found by now. That's my observation. But now Russia has transitioned fully into a war economy, and what are they going to do? Like they're going to do war. And so how do you get out of that? I don't know. It's much more difficult now than it was, say, a year ago. And the CCP is directly, responsible for that. It's not only, we could have these discussions, but very, very importantly, yeah.
We just had a program on central bank digital currency. We had Aaron Day here twice from the Brownstone Institute. Do you have any sense of the Chinese influence on our country in the CBDC and the Ethereum decision?
Well, they would love to see the digital yuan, which they've, introduced already to become the world reserve currency or something like that, right? Then they could have total control. Of course, I don't think that's going to happen. But everybody familiar with the concept of CBDCs? Oh yeah, everybody here's seen Aaron Day. Okay, good. Aaron is the man on this. I don't know what specific designs China has on the U.S. development of Fed coins, or the various, basically the U.S. version of CBDCs and elsewhere. But I do know that they're very bent on introducing this digital yuan because, well, as if you've listened to Aaron, you understand it's a total control mechanism. It's not, it stops being currency, it becomes something else, right? Behavior modification, influence, et cetera, et cetera. So, yeah, I don't think they're terribly successful with it because I think most people are like, it's really a bad idea, you guys controlling that. So.
Okay. Well, I want to give you a little bit of a softball question because you have so many fans here that watch the American Thought Leaders. So
okay.
You can pick which one you want. Okay. So either who's the person you most want to interview and haven't been able to yet, because I'm pretty much sure you can pick up the phone and get to talk to most people. I'm going to actually offer you 3 questions.
Okay.
The person that you want to talk to and haven't been able to.
Okay.
The person from history you'd most like to have a nice sit down with. Or the person who surprised you most during your interview.
Wow, these are tough. So I'm one of these people that has anguish over such questions. Oh, what could it be, right? Well, so I do have to say I would very much like to interview Elon Musk. He's someone, kind of from this tradition, Silicon Valley tradition. It might be difficult for him because he has obviously, very strong relationship with communist China in that a lot of their manufacturing, Tesla's manufacturing is done there, right? But I think he's a genuinely good, positive actor in all of this. It's a very curious relationship. I'd love to be able to talk to him about all this because it must be very challenging for him to, let's say, thread the needle, so to speak, on this situation. And I imagine he's trying to think of ways to reduce his dependence on communist China. So yeah, that would be my historical figure. There's so many people, but Alexander Solzhenitsyn comes to mind, as someone I would have loved to have spoken with. If you want to go really back in history, Sun Tzu, right? The Art of War, author of The Art of War, right? This is one of the Chinese regime was very effective during the Cultural Revolution of destroying all vestiges of traditional Chinese culture. But they said, the military warfare doctrines, we'll keep those. They weren't that crazy. So anyway, those are just off the top of my head, people. And the third question?
And the third question was the person who surprised you most, caught you off guard, or just wasn't what you thought, or you had a moment.
Jay Bhattacharya. No. Well, no, but all jokes aside, I was filming, I first met Jay some years back when I was filming this documentary about Ron DeSantis's unusual policy decisions during COVID. And so Ron introduced me to his experts, and I think you might have been the first one that I interviewed. So I remember that time because I remember listening and just being kind of stunned. And I can't even remember the specific thing. I remember, like, Scott Atlas, I remember when he told me, I said, lockdowns, there must be a pro and pros and cons, right, to doing a lockdown policy. And Scott said, no, Jan, there's no pro. It's all con. And let me explain this to you. And I still get shivers when I think about that, because it really changed my view, right? And of course, both of these gentlemen have been proven Stanford's best, right? Or some of them at least.
Stanford's
have
very
been proven
best.
Right. So, I mean, it's great that you're here. It's wonderful, actually, that you're here today. So, yeah.
Beautiful. Jan walks his talk. He has a very good mind and a very good heart and an innate sense of decency that he brings to journalism, from which we are all beneficiaries. Jan, I want to thank you so much for bringing your warmth and your intellect to the Liberty Forum of Silicon Valley tonight. Thank you so much. Jan Jekielek. That's for you. You can give me that. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Do I go down now?
Thank you for watching our presentation. Please like and subscribe to our channel to get updates on new speakers, and consider joining the Liberty Forum of Silicon Valley. You can do so at our website. If you don't want to join, but want to support the principles of American liberty, you can make a tax-deductible donation via our website. The links are in the description. Thank you again, and stay free.